Welcome to the Connected Leaders Academy virtual conference designed to reshape your vision of transformation. As we navigate the evolving business landscape, our speakers will unveil innovative strategies to manage and initiate change. Prepare to adapt, innovate, and lead, ensuring your role as a catalyst in this transformative era.
Hey, how many of you during your lifetime have felt that people are totally misjudging you? One of the most misguided assumptions that we make about people is that we know who they are or where they came from and what journey that they were on. But most of us, we make assumptions that, are wrong. Now, I today would like to share with you a little bit of background information about myself because I am one of those people who has been totally misjudged most of my life. Most people think that I'm a prissy girl who came from a very privileged life with a lot of assistance, and nothing could be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, I am a bit prissy, but my life started out very untraditional, and I'd like to just share that with you. I was raised in a children's home at the age of 6.5. My mother left us. Let me start off first by explaining a little bit of information about them. My mother and father, they were teenagers when they first had my sister. And at the age of 16 and 17, they had 7 children in an 8-year span. And most of us are less than a year apart in age. And so that's probably not going to turn out very well in respect to what we know about life and statistics. So at 6.5, my mother left and she never returned. And our father brought into our life a stepmother who was just horrific in the way that she treated us. She was very abusive and would beat us daily. And when they took control of us, they took us to Florida. And that was away from the safety of our grandfather and our grandmother, who were in Nashville and had really watched over us and kept us safe. And so, anyway, as that story continues, it probably, you probably realize that's not going to turn out well at all. We were in Florida for about 4 years with a stepmother who tormented and beat us daily. And when I was 10.5 years old, as I got off the school bus, the last day of school for the 5th grade year, as I and my siblings, we entered that little bitty house that my father had rented for us off the interstate. We found that we were again alone and we had been abandoned. After spending like a month in that house alone, we were eating food that was left in the refrigerator and a pot of goulash that my father dropped off to us. And for a month, that's how we survived. Now, a month later, our father turned us over to the authorities and we were placed in a foster home. And that's where we stayed until our grandparents, who'd been looking for us the whole time, of course, we didn't know that, they did find us. My grandfather, he came to Florida. He spent countless hours. He tracked down a judge who was in charge of the juvenile court system, and he went to his house. Now, my grandfather went and he sat in that judge's backyard with a bottle of Jack Daniels and a wad of money and some cigars. He'd collected that money from friends and family and people from the church that they attended. And he convinced them, that judge, to give him custody of us. My grandparents, they immediately took us back to Nashville. Now, how well do you think this story turns out? The journey that I was on and what happened was at 11 years old, I went to the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home. You see, my grandparents, they were too old and too poor to care for us. And so it was a heartbreaking decision that they made, but they decided to place us in the children's home. And that's where I grew up. On September the 17th, I arrived at the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home, which was a facility that housed over 100 children. And we were in dormitories and we were separated by ages and gender. And I lived in the middle girl building, which was housed for girls from ages 10 to 13. Now, my space was on the third floor because I was one of the youngest. The 10 and 11-year-olds were on the top floor, and the 12 and 13 were on the bottom floor. We all lived in these enormous rooms with these little cot-like beds and huge bathrooms, and we climbed numerous of stairs every day that, to be on the third floor. Now, most of the clothes that I wore, they were hand-me-downs, because the people from our community, they donated it to us. And I would sift through those donations that were usually on the commissary floor. I was searching for something that fit me well and made me feel pretty. Now, I did have two prized possessions that I remember. One was a pair of navy blue corduroy pants, and I'm pretty sure they were boy pants, but they fit me good. So I love them. But my favorite was a pair of brand new moccasins. And I wore those moccasins every single day until I wore the bottoms out. And I fix those bottoms with cardboard, and I would continue to wear them. Well, one of the teachers, it was my 8th grade teacher, in fact, she saw those shoes, and so she towed the children's home, and they intervened and made me throw them away. And man, I was so mad. But from these experiences, these are some of the things that shaped me. And my friends tease me about how I am never underdressed. I'm always pretty much overdressed. But it was from the children's home when I had so little. I saw life really different than most children do. And even as a child, I knew that that was no way to grow up. The dorms, they were filled with anger and pain and chaos. And it made sense that most of the children, they were just very wounded, and people react out of the way that they live and what they experience. And so there was a lot of chaos and pain and anger all around me. And so for the next 4 years, it was a rather violent place. But I had to learn real quickly to control my anger and to manage the other children and my own self. And it became easier when about 4 years into the children's home, they built these small cottages. These were houses that were housing only 8 children at the time. And me and my brothers and sisters, we were so fortunate to be one of the very first families to get to move into that little cottage. And, it became a place of calmness for us because we were under the same roof for the first time after 4 years. And it brought it a peace and a safety to us. And it brought a calmness to us. And what's wrong? Anyway, these lessons, they also are why I wrote my book, Stepping Stones, Creating Personal Integrity. It is also why I wrote the seminar and the book series. For about 15 years ago, a preacher, he asked me, he said, Debbie, why is it someone that like you who has lived through so much adversity and has not had a safety net during your life, but yet you created a healthy and a pursuable life? And I looked at him and I said, I really think it's just fear. And he said, well, I need you to figure that out, because when you figure out the answer to that question, then that is going to be your message to the world. Now, that conversation, it is what started me on my journey of discovery, for finding out and starting to share what I believed to be the answer. And so what I did was I practiced 5 steps for me overcoming the obstacles and the challenges that I had and faced as a young child and just a young adult. And I created and transformed my life by looking at the integrity of how I lived. Now, that first step for me is forgiveness and acceptance. Forgiveness, it's where all healing comes, and it's a very powerful thing that you will place in your life. And also accepting where you came from, it's a motivator. But forgiveness, the first step, I believe it's required by God, because God knows that unforgiveness is going to create bitterness and pain, and it'll cause damage to a person who holds resentment for themselves and their loved ones. It's also for you and your healing. It's not for the person who, wounded you or hurt you, but it is important because it'll give you strength and the ability to overcome that resentment. The other is accepting where you came from. Don't be ashamed of it. It's a story of triumph. It's the beginning of your journey, and it's going to determine where your journey ends. I'd like to share a few stories with you about how I feel important forgiveness is. As a 6-year-old for over 4.5 years, me and my siblings, we were pulled from our beds in the middle of the night as we slept. And this was done almost weekly. We were thrown on the floor as our stepmother kicked and hit us. There was never an indication or a reason why. The only purpose, it was for fear and torment. As a 9-year-old kid, as I was pushed down a flight of stairs after my stepmother, she loaded my arms so high with rugs, they were piled so far that I couldn't see over them. And she pushed me down the stairs. And when I tried to stand up, I realized that the bottom half of my leg had been turned outwards. My stepmother, she then proceeded to put that leg back in place with her hands, as me and my older brother, we looked on in just complete horror. As I heard the cartilage being torn, I knew better than to cry out, because it would be a beating, because we were not allowed to speak without permission. I was put to bed for that entire summer for that leg to heal on its own. And there was no way she or my father was going to take us to the doctor. I mean, how would they explain the circumstances and their actions? I have stories like these that could go on for hours of the abuse that my siblings and that we endured. But I believe you probably get the general idea. My point is, and it really is my message, is that not only is forgiveness important, but it's possible and it is doable. Now, the second step in healing, which I put into action, was knowing who you are and what you stand for. It's about knowing what you accept in your life and where you'll draw that line in the sand, the place that of how you practice your convictions and your beliefs. I learned early on that life wasn't easy and it wasn't fair. And as an 11-year-old, I was required to get up every morning at the children's home at 5 a.m. And I had to walk across campus to the cafeteria with 3 other girls from my dorm. Now, how many of you have an 11-year-old? I want you to just imagine, just for a moment, them preparing breakfast and dinner for over 100 children. I would sometimes burn myself on the huge industrial ovens and the industrial dishwashers, that heat coming off of them. And from this experience, I learned about my work ethic. And I began to understand later on in life that was a really valuable lesson for me to learn. It wasn't fun, but it was required. And I had to accept that my life was not normal, even as a kid, and that all the decisions and all the choices that I would make would lead to circumstances and coincidences and things like that. And so I didn't have the privilege or the luxury of participating in normal social life that other children had. And I also learned, though, from that I had to learn to control my emotions. Can you just imagine 100 kids who had been abused and abandoned, and how out of control they were because they didn't like how much hard work it was and that type of thing. But you know what? That was a training ground. It was how I learned to maneuver people, and I became aware of them and their behavior. It was my training ground for learning and developing and figuring out about people and personalities. What happened was that later the skill set and the talents that I learned from that opportunity, I created a successful life in public relations and sales and business development. We all need to learn to control our emotions and the outbursts, because it doesn't turn out well for anyone when we react in that way. And I learned that early. You need to learn to control your emotions and your actions in any situation. It was non-negotiable for me. And, as a person who wants to create a place of safety in your life, it has to become non-negotiable for you, because you are responsible for all your actions and all your emotions, no matter what the situation is. And so if you get to the point to where you feel like you're out of control, what I do is I count, I breathe, and I pause. And sometimes I have to count and breathe and pause again, or I walk away. I walk away until I can gain control of my emotions. Whatever it takes for you to stay in control, you must learn to practice. It is a skill that you can learn and that you can practice. You can also learn better communication skills by practicing and teaching yourself those skills set, knowing who you are and what you stand for. It requires honesty about yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly. You can hide from the world, but you can't hide from yourself. And make no mistake that every decision that you have ever made, it has led you to the place where you are now. So choose those paths, uh, choose them wisely and just practice your emotions so that you'll have a better transformation and come out better in creating a life of integrity. The third was determined. I was always determined. I knew very early in life what I wanted it to look like. At first it was simply, I didn't want it to include violence and ugliness of abuse. And I had so many challenges in my life, just like I'm sure all of you do. You didn't think you would recover at times when you had some of those challenges, but you did, and you will. And so you must continue to get back up and start over and over again. It will build a belief in yourself, in your abilities to survive and to continue in life. Now, I graduated from high school at 18, and I decided to attend college. Now, one of the reasons for that was because when you turned 18 at the children's home, you had to leave. And I was one of the only children of 20 of us who graduated that year, including my older brother, who was only 10 and a half months older than me. And so we graduated together. Everyone was given the opportunity to go to college if they were accepted. And of course, if you could get in. I was the only one who chose to go. And I know why. It's because the children, they were scared to death and they were so fearful of the unknown. And make no mistake about it, I was too. Matter of fact, I was scared to death. I was dropped off at college 4 weeks after graduating from high school with a box of my belongings and a good luck to you, girl. And that really is how my journey into adulthood began. I lived on campus during the summer and the Maymasters and the holidays because I did not have a home to return to. I worked at a department store, Castronauts. It's gone now, but some of you might remember it. And every Tuesday and Thursday night and every weekend and every single holiday, I would work there. And, just to get extra money for my expenses. My college was paid for, but the other things weren't. I never did feel sorry for myself, or I didn't even share my story with people because I learned early that no one was coming to rescue me. And that translated into me being one of the biggest rule followers ever. My husband makes such fun of me. But I knew that I couldn't make any big mistakes, that I couldn't take any uncalculated risk because I already understood very early that every choice, every decision that I made, there were consequences going to be attached to them. And the truth of the matter was that my childhood, it had never been normal. And my normal, it just became trying to figure out whatever situation I was in and trying to maneuver it just as successfully as I could. Now, the fourth step that I practiced was setting goals and making plans because you really do need to know where you want to go and what it looks like before you can get there. Now, I had an idea as a little girl what I wanted that to look like. It was a space of an environment that mostly held a sense of safety, one that was clean and quiet and light. And the direction on how to accomplish that, that changed as I grew, as I matured, as I learned from life lessons, and as I continued to work very hard. It changed into something more just bigger. And I wanted people to respect me. I knew that. And I wanted people to learn to believe in me. And so I learned to believe and respect in myself along the way. And finally I just transformed that dream and I created a life for myself. I had to leave people behind that didn't have a positive mindset. And I gave myself permission to treat failure as a lesson. I have learned so much more from my failures than I ever did from my successes. It gave me a wider skill set, and I learned more about success and how to obtain that. Now, I also carried around a lot of fear at that time. I was married for 16 years and I went through a divorce, and it was a hard time for me. It was so dark. And, but among all the betrayal and the pain and the anger, I had 2 young children I had to take care of, and myself. And I knew I could take care of myself. After all, I've been doing that forever. But I had to come to the realization that I had to take care of the 3 of us. But more importantly, I had to come to the realization that what I had wished for my whole life, which was a family life that looked normal, wasn't going to happen. And that wasn't going to happen because I made a wrong choice. I made a wrong choice in the partner that I had chosen. And so what I did was I stopped and I took an inventory of my life and those patterns that we all create in our life. And I started to change them and recognize them and say, build better skills, learn how to overcome those. And so I started over with the only 2 really long strengths and talents that I had. And that was my hard work ethic, my strong work ethic, and my ability to connect with people. And what I did is I built a successful life, a successful business with people who did respect me, and I gained some great friendships and I treasured them. I also broke that cycle of abuse and violence and even the generational curses that come from that. After 20 years of being divorced, I did remarry. And he was a worthy man of me, but probably more importantly, I became a better partner for him. And I became worthy of him. And he is the first person, so I got that dream finally, who has brought to me a place of safety.
Thank you for participating in today's enlightening session. As we transition to our next expert, remember that each strategy and insight is a step toward becoming a transformative leader in your field. Visit connectedleadersacademy.com to stay engaged and informed. The journey of change is ongoing. Let's move forward together.